Welcome to Tales of Abundance. It's the winter of 1944. Nazi Germany is blockading Western Holland, and there's 4.5 million Dutch civilians that just don't have any food. They're surviving on 400 calories a day. They're eating things like tulip bulbs, sugar beets. 20,000 people starved to death. 40 years later, here's what researchers found. The children that were born to the mothers who were pregnant during that famine, their DNA was permanently altered. Not their habits, not their choices, their actual genetic code changed before birth. Their bodies were hardwired for scarcity before they took their first breath. The code written before they were born ran the rest of their lives.
You know, during an era just before that, a mother named Eliza gives her son, 7-year-old son, a blue china bowl. Put your pennies in here, she told him. At the age of 12, she hands him $50 and tells him to lend it to the farmer at a 7% interest rate. A year later, he gets $53 back. The boy realizes it's better to be a master of the money than its servant. For the rest of his life, he kept a small notebook, recorded every single cent he spent, and he was still doing it when he became the richest man on earth. That was John D. Rockefeller. 2 childhoods, 2 operating systems, one wired for scarcity, one wired for abundance. Both ran for a lifetime unchanged. So here's the question. Who wrote your code? And is it still running? You toward the life you actually want. Let's talk about it.
John, you want to talk about the money script and if we actually have one? Do I want to bring Dr. John in on this?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different researchers who've written a lot of different mental models about how money and your money concept is developed. And there's certainly something to what happens if you're growing up in famine, or if you're, if you're in the womb during famine. Like, there's certainly scientific evidence that there's something to that. There's models about whether you have, like, you see money as being something that is about status versus a tool. I think when I think about money, when I'm in coaching sessions, I really want to know how people viewed money when they were young. Like, did they see their parents as spendthrifts, where they were just spending everything they had? Did they see them as very thrifty? Or did they see them as someone who didn't talk about money, so it was kind of obfuscated from them and hidden behind the closed doors, like my upbringing? And here's the important part for people to understand. Whatever your upbringing was, you have a relationship with money based on how you were brought up. That's true. And you can change that script if you're deliberate about it and you want to. You can change it. And so just because you saw something growing up or you're in the womb at a certain point doesn't mean that that predetermines your entire future. You can change those things. It may take various amounts of work to do it, but it is possible. So there is something that happened. There's something you can do about it if you want to. That's been my experience broadly, and I think the science would support that.
Yeah, John, you and I have had conversations. Heck, you and I had conversations on this podcast about, I definitely grew up closer to the Dutch people example of this with a scarcity mindset. But, it was later in life where I really thought about that, right? I think a lot of people go through life and they're just unaware that that stuff did shape them, and that they didn't choose their beliefs about money, that their environment did, right? So I think just being aware of it is a good first step. But Anthony, before we started, we were talking about the code and how it's hardwired and, the Dutch story in particular. And your question was, so are you saying there's no choice, right? That these people are just born, it's in their DNA, and they don't have a choice. So you want to talk about that for a minute?
Well, as John said, you can change, but I almost view this as your relationship with money as a habit, a habit of dealing with money in a particular way. And habits are hard to change, as we all know, no matter what the habit is. Quick question for you, Randy. When you think about your early childhood, which one of these 4 types, money worship, money status, money avoidance, or money vigilance, do you think you started out with? Same
Avoidance.
Question for John. Avoidance. So in other words, money's evil, is the root of all evil. Rich people are jerks. They take advantage of us. Oh, you were Bernie Sanders, essentially.
I don't think
Bernie
that's how you be
Sanders?
classified. So respect with Randy with what you did. I mean, you often describe your childhood as your parents threw around nickels like they were manhole covers, right? And so there was a level of vigilance and thriftiness with your family that like every single penny counted. And there was almost like this clutching of money in your family, right?
Yeah, but it was more the things I heard and the belief system that if somebody had money, they screwed people, they stepped on the little guy to get there, that, it was the thing from the church. Money is the root of all evil came from church. I mean, there was multiple messages where I grew up that anybody that was really rich was a bad person. And the way this played out in my life, again, we've talked about this on previous episodes. So the Reader's Digest version is I made money and then I lost it, and I made money and I lost it. And it took me years to realize that I was somehow self-sabotaging myself because I didn't want to be a bad person. And I equated having money with being a bad person. So
Yeah,
that's
I would never I would never question your instinct of what you believed in the beginning. John, what about you?
Well, hold
Which
on.
one of these?
I just want to, it's such an interesting case for you to dive into because just one thing that Randy said there that people can dive into, like the church says that money is the root of all evil is actually not what was said, but it's often misconstrued and leads to this really unhealthy relationship with a tool, right? The church says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And it's a really important distinction. And that's the way that belief systems of all kinds get generated, whether it's biblical or spiritual or not. Like, I think that's the type of like, really and by the way, I do believe that Randy was brought up believing that money was the root of evil. Like for sure, lots of people have that, but that's not the actual saying from that source. So anyway, I was brought up, Anthony, where money was not talked about. So I walked into a room where my parents were doing the bills, and I was politely excused from the room, and the door was shut. And so I wasn't told what was happening with money. And so when I was 14 or so years old, my mom took me to the bank. We opened a bank account, and then she made sure I enrolled in a class in high school that taught me how to balance my checkbook. And that was really the end of the conversation. And so it wasn't taboo as a topic, but it wasn't to be talked about. And so I had to actually go and learn about money very deliberately. I had a mentor when I was about 19 that introduced me to the concepts of money management and a book called The Wealthy Barber that talked about compounding interest. And I started to learn about money as a tool. And then I was introduced to a group of people where it was a spendthrift environment. And so that was another set of models. And then years later, I actually ended up talking to some PhDs in psychology and having a whole bunch of conversations to kind of develop very deliberately my attitude toward money, which I think now is pretty healthy, seeing money as a tool. But there's still some of the roots of what I saw from my parents, some of the roots that I saw from that spendthrift environment. And yeah, so it's been a journey.
So you move through and back on all of these four types. In other words, maybe it was avoidance in the beginning because you didn't know anything about it, and then you develop in time different. Did you ever get to the point where you worship money?
Yeah, there was definitely a point in my life where I worshiped money because I thought money equated to security. And so there was this now, I believe, false belief that money gave me security. And if you're ever curious about that, you can just go look at people who had a ton of money in the French Revolution, and it all kind of got wiped out in the French Revolution. So sometimes I talk to lots of people who think that money gives them a security that it doesn't really give them. And so yes, the short answer, I did.
And by the way, to John's point, there was definitely an anxiety, right? Like when he talks about throwing around nickels like they're manhole covers, the thing I understood really well is we can't afford that. Doesn't really matter what that was. We can't afford that was the standard answer for most anything, right? And so there is that also added to the scarcity mindset.
Yeah. So
Anthony,
I asked
you
you
grew up
guys.
different.
Yeah, I grew up very different than you guys, and I grew up in a small town, and my father had a pretty successful construction company with his brothers and sister, and we lived in a home that was single family home that was on the ocean, and in a working class town, we were considered part of the money class, if you will, and. Notwithstanding, my father would take home $400 a week, and once a year he'd get a distribution from the company that he would last, hopefully for the balance of the year to buy all the trinkets. And at an early age in my mental model was money is status. Where we stand above, with the Custonuses and the Liebermans and a few other families in our small town. It was a small town of 20,000 people. We stood above them in my mind. My father drove a Cadillac and then a Lincoln Continental. And then there were these kind of two classes of people. There were the construction workers, the airport baggage handlers, and then there were the professionals, the doctors, the lawyers, Falbo, and a bunch of other people. So it started off there. But things changed, later on in life where the money ran out in my early mid-teens to late teens. The money disappeared, literally, not figuratively, literally disappeared. And the good news was, while status, I looked at money as status, and probably my dad did the same, underlying it was a vigilance, hard work, get more, do whatever you had to do to get more. If that meant, working 14 hours a day and so forth. So for the rest of my life, once I left home, it was all about vigilance, because I was petrified to go back to the place where we didn't have money. Yeah, I could buy nice cars and live in nice houses, but I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking about vigilance the whole time. How do I make, a good living? Hell, when I had to change jobs, I one time in my career, when Sears got bought and we all got fired, I got 2 years of severance, 2 years of severance pay at my paycheck. Within 30 days, I had a job. Okay. Within 30 days, I took another job. That just kind of shows that I always wanted to have something coming in. Even though something was coming in, I didn't look at it that way. So yeah, very different lifestyle.
What's interesting, though, is the amount of money you have doesn't have a lot of correlation to the viewpoint that you have. So you might find people that have tons of money, but have the whole spectrum of beliefs about money. People that have no money have the spectrum of beliefs about money. So I've not been able to find a correlation between the amount of money somebody has. Maybe it's there, but I think that you can certainly find all walks of life in all walks of life. And so to me, the good news about that is that once you identify this as a point of reference, you can choose whether or not you want to continue down that path or choose to go down a different path. Like that's available.
I find it really interesting that different people that grew up with the same inputs into their operating system process it completely differently, right? Like a lot of the most successful people, the super rich, the billionaires, or as Bernie would say, the billionaires and the trillionaires, a lot of them grew up without money, and they grew up with a scarcity mindset, and they just desperately didn't want that future. Like they're running away from being poor and into being rich. And to your point, John, I don't think a lot of those are super happy a lot of times. Some of them are. Right. And some people grow up in my mindset of, oh, everything's expensive and it's scarcity, but they grow up in, I have to get away from this and, get out of it. And it's any inputs that we get from our parents. It's really interesting how two different siblings take the same input based on, I don't know, belief system, their wiring, how old they are, or, their perspective, and it, transforms them in different ways, sometimes positive, sometimes negative in the same input. So let's talk about who that is. Like we've been talking about parents in our family, but John, does it have to be just parents?
I think the prevalent thought process is it's mostly parents for most people. The psychology of a person gets developed a huge amount between 0 and 6, 0 and 7 years old. And parents are generally the people that are around the most for those periods. And so I think, yeah, the short answer is your family is really where that happens. And so now if you're, adopted, then it's the environment that you're in primarily. Although there's some interesting science about, the DNA that impacts of, what happens when you're in the womb impacting financial outcomes. And I don't know how much information we have on that being causal or if it's just correlated, but the information would certainly indicate that there are things even before you're born that have some impact.
I think for me, it was the whole community as much. I mean, my parents were certainly the most dominant, but it was grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, friends. Like that was just, it was rural Minnesota. It wasn't a rich place. And I think for me, it was the entire culture, community where I grew up that was all contributing, maybe to different degrees. But later in my life, as I started searching for mentors and things, I tried to find different money models. right? And different people that could come along. And, back to Anthony's question, are you stuck with this? We didn't really answer that. I mean, I think I've done a really good job turning that around in the last few years through mental models, but I'll be honest, it was a lot of work. Like changing belief systems is freaking hard. And we've done episodes on that too. But I think to answer your question, Anthony, you can change. I think I've mostly changed, but it's a battle, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, but I'm going to come at it in a little different. Not that that's surprising. Come at it a little differently, and I can only speak for myself. So I'm not going to try to speak for other people and how they arrived to where they arrived. But I have a hard time understanding the 0 to 7-year-old thing, and I'm not going to doubt science because they do their research. So something got hardwired in me that carried me through that period of time where money was status, right? But as the things changed, as I said, I don't think I consciously, I'm going to reframe that. I know that I wasn't thinking about moving to something else. I just woke up and realized, and I didn't know these terms, by the way, at that time. So it was very easy to put these terms in place at the various points in my life. But I just ended up being vigilant. Okay. It wasn't a plan. The environment, the sands of time shifted things, and it almost, well, it did. It forced a change, right? Because when you don't have anything, in a literal sense, you can say I'm after money for status, but when you have nothing, you have a choice. You either you do something to get it, or I don't know what you do. I guess you wallow away and get on government assistance and live the rest of your life that way. But, I wasn't a plan. Now, skip ahead 25, 30 years, I started to have a lot more respect for my choices and my emphasis in my life. And so, yeah, I could sit back today and say, I fall into this particular category now. It's not about the status. It's not about worship. It's really none of these things. Still working hard. So I guess I'm still vigilant to an extent. But you just it seems like you just kind of have a choice to end up somewhere if you're willing to do the work and take care of yourself. And perhaps that's a theme here, that if you let your environment push you around and just accept it, then you're going to end up in one of these places. And as John said, you're not necessarily going to be happy because you're not making choices. You end up somewhere.
Yeah, I'm going to say it differently, Anthony. Not making a choice is a choice. Like, I think that's, and if I had to talk about like the abundance mindset for people, so I grew up, shouldn't talk about money. I found some mentors at age 19. Then money became security, which was a different problem for me. Then in my mid-30s, I had some things that happened in my life that forced me to re-examine some things. And I have the money beliefs that I have now that I think are much more healthy than the money beliefs I had growing up and even in my 20s. But the reality is that in many parts of our life, not making a choice is a choice. And my wish for people would be they could see that. And then if they choose not to make a choice, at least they know they're choosing not to make a choice. And then they're just letting the current take them where the current's going. But I don't, at least people get to choose that deliberately. So that's what I would say about it.
Yeah.
And you've worked really hard, by the way, Anthony, on your stuff. Like you can say, here's where I am today because of time and maturity. But the reality is, if you've spent a lot of energy trying to improve yourself over the years, even since I've known you, and that's been a constant for you, is how do I get better? Is that fair?
Yeah. And I think, I don't know where we get this from, right? But when you have an emphasis just on working and making money because you didn't have it before, you sacrifice so much of yourself in your personal development, in your not so much your professional, but your emotional development, your development with your kids and your family. That's where I've put the work in, is doing, and God knows I'm not perfect in any of this stuff, but that was the real shift for me, was, this stuff over here is one thing, but my goodness, there's a whole other life that I'm participating in, not to the extent that I want to. And it was personal. It was professional. It was, bringing people in to be partners for the first time in my life, which was something I had never done before. Yeah. So it was work. It worked out fine for me. And
The other thing that
others,
I think people do when we get into this is they start feeling like a victim. And I don't want that to come across here. Like, I think people are like, well, my parents or my neighborhood, or I grew up this way. And they kind of get a victim mentality. And, I could be upset about my parents for teaching me a scarcity mindset, but I have to give them credit for all the great things they did. I mean, on total, I had really great parents, and they taught me a lot of stuff about, in my opinion, about being a good person and hard work. And I just think that sometimes as humans, we tend to be quick to point blame and say, hey, here's how they screwed me up, while not simultaneously giving them credit. Right. And some of these people that, became super rich because their parents were overbearing and whatever, and they've become super successful, don't want to give them credit for the work ethic that they installed is a good example too. So I think it's important to look at both sides of what we were talking
and
about.
also, go ahead,
Hold on.
John, I'm sorry.
It's worth saying that the understanding where you are and how you got there is instructive for figuring out if you want to be somewhere else, how to get there, right? So I tell people all the time, if you're hiking and you know where you want to go, then it's good to know where you want to go, but you can't actually be successful unless you also know where you are. I was canoeing with a buddy of mine once who's he was a pilot for planes and great navigator. And I wanted to be somewhere at the end of our canoeing trip. And we got to a fork in the river and I was like, let's go left. He's like, we need to go right. And I was like, we have to go left. And he's like, we definitely need to go right. And I had to be somewhere. And he's like, well, we can go left. We're just going to miss your event. And I was like, but I don't want to miss my event. He's like, well, then we should go right. And I was like, okay, I know we should definitely go left. You know we should definitely go right. And we both know that you're the better navigator. So something's wrong here. So I opened up the map. I was like, this is where we want to go. He's like, that's correct. I was like, well, this is where we came from. He's like, that is not correct. I was like, well, son of a gun. I was like, where did we come from? And he showed me where he came from. I was like, oh, we should go right. He's like, that's correct. So it wasn't about where we were going. It was about being honest about where we were coming from. And I think oftentimes people know where they want to go, but they're not honest about where they're coming from for whatever reason. And so I think this part of the conversation is helpful. So you know that you want to go right at the fork in the river, not left to get to where you want to go. And that's about where you came from. And so where you're coming from isn't necessarily useful from a victim perspective, but it's super useful in terms of knowing which way to turn.
Yeah. And I think, I think is a great point, but it bears saying that, as the Bob Dylan song would say, times they are a-changing. I grew up in a period, I'm a boomer, and get rich quick wasn't any part of the discussion, right? It was, everything was, 1 2x4 at a time in your life to build something that you were after. And I had an uncle as a mentor early that taught me about the stock market. I was living in a world where up to that period of time, money wasn't an issue in my life and so forth. But at no point was I in an abundance mindset of, well, after tomorrow, I'm going to have 1 million followers and I'm going to be making, YouTube money and so on and so forth. You guys also grew up at the end of that era, but also you came of age during a time, and I'm speaking for you and I apologize, but at a time when there was an internet boom and there was a lot of get rich quick stuff. Randy was part of a company that he one time said, I was going to be a billionaire. I was a billionaire on paper or something, or a multimillionaire on paper. And those things went away. So let me
Anthony,
finish.
the 70s is considered the golden age of get rich quick schemes, by the way. You may not have had exposure to it, but there were so many get rich quick, every generation has, you just weren't exposed to them.
Maybe so. Certainly not in my neighborhood. Okay. Certainly not in the colleges that I went to or the first jobs that I had to. I was a rag salesman in my first job, by the way. So yeah, maybe I wasn't exposed, but pales in comparison to today, John. Pales in comparison to 99 to 2003 in terms of, the things that slipped through people's fingers during that time. Very, very different thing. And the reason I bring it up is this is all about abundance and being conscious of your environment, being conscious of what your next step is. We talked before about problem solving, and we talked about, making your way in life, and it's literally one step at a time. Now, I think the steps today can be quicker than the manual steps that we took, back in the 70s and 80s. Things have accelerated, and I think you should be very hopeful if you're struggling or you're trying to figure out your way, that doors are opening faster and faster for people. And I just think from the point of this whole, podcast series we're doing, the opportunity for abundance is on your doorstep, and you just have to figure out, what door to open, if you will.
So let me ask you a question. Just opinions. I don't know how I feel. So let's say you take somebody like me that grew up with a scarcity mindset. And let's say that I would have somehow got put right in the middle of Wall Street when I was 22 years old and being around people doing multi-million-dollar deals. What do you think would have happened? Dr. John, let's start with you. What do you think would have happened?
Yeah, I don't know. I got to imagine that all types have been successful on Wall Street and all types have failed because there's more variables in that. And then there's probably, some version of that where you leave Wall Street because it just blows your brain up, right? There's got to be some version of that where you are so scarce that you find opportunities nobody else found, like, Warren Buffett, the kind of the last puff of the cigar mindset. So, my crystal ball is broken today, but I think, the Randy that I know today, pretty enterprising, right? So I think that you might have been a boom and bust guy where you went and found an opportunity, made a ton, busted it all, then kind of went back and did it again.
It's a real possibility, probably. Anthony, you have any thoughts?
I'd be dead.
You'd be dead?
I think, I'd be dead. I think if I grew up, if I was in that run and gun, the get rich quick, John's point about get rich quick, Wall Street was the place, right? That was where that was happening. There was, all kinds of pyramid schemes and all kinds of insider trading and so forth. And had I got rich in that environment, the early 70s behaviors would have kicked in and probably killed me. Honestly, I honestly believe that. I think the best thing that ever happened to me is, I wouldn't call them the best mentors in the world. The mentors that I had as I had a career were always, you want to be upwardly mobile. You want to do the work necessary to get the next promotion, because the next promotion means stock options and, a little bit of status and so forth. I'm glad I had that, because it was a much more paced climb, if you will. Still hard, a lot of work, a lot of time away from the family, but getting rich quick, I don't think would have been good for me personally.
I really don't know the answer, because I think being around that kind of money and that kind of thinking has to expand your mind and get you thinking bigger, faster. So I would think there would be that. I think, John, your thing that I might have hit big and went broke and hit big but is really interesting. But my real takeaway is that my mindset wouldn't have allowed me to go into that situation. That it would have probably, it's an irrelevant question because I wasn't yet ready for that experience, or it would have just somehow protected me on my subconscious, is what I thought. So,
or you might have found a real mentor who identified the problem with that thinking for Wall Street and helped you through it. Or you might have found someone who saw it and was able to manipulate it for something else. Like, those things are all real. They all happen.
Yeah. So, John, Anthony, we all know high earners, people that make a lot of money and they still feel broke. Can we talk about that for a minute? Because I think that's something that, I don't know. There might be people listening that feel that way, right? They're like, they make a lot of money, but they feel broke. So is that imposter syndrome, or what's going on there?
I can speak personally to it. I think there is an imposter syndrome, but depending on how you accumulated that wealth, I still shop sales. I still get twinges when I see the Amex bill. I don't need to worry about that stuff, and I still do. It's just waste. Waste is waste. I don't care if you got $100 in the bank or $100 million in the bank. Waste is waste, and that's in my head, and I know it's going to always be there. So I don't know if that's an imposter syndrome or just leftover mental, physical, emotional conditioning that I've developed, since the beginning of time. So don't have a straight answer for you, but I know how I feel. I still check I don't have an electric car now, but driving with my wife to the airport yesterday, I was looking at the price of gas at the 2 or 3 stations I had a choice at.
John, what are your thoughts here? What's Dr. John say?
What was I was so deep into Anthony's answer there.
We all know people that are super successful from the outside, right? They have lots of money. They're financial winners by anybody's checkbook, but maybe not their own, right? What is that? They're not happy. They're not satisfied, even though everybody else would love to be in their shoes.
Yeah, I think that's not a money problem. That's a happiness problem. And I think what I would say to that is that, I've met people who make almost nothing that have been some of the happiest people I've ever met in my life. And I think that children are a great kind of lens into that, right? Children oftentimes don't register all the money stuff, and you find just inordinate amounts of joy. And then I think there are some people that think that money is the thing that gives them happiness. And my experience is that, happiness is a byproduct of other things. It's not a function of money in particular. And there's some interesting studies around that. Like, the money's impact on happiness starts to kind of degrade after about $80,000 a year in income per person in the relatively recent past. And then, even at the top ends, $100 million in net worth gives you all the utility of a billionaire or a trillionaire if you're willing to rent the experience instead of buy the experience. And so, people want to be a billionaire or have $500 million, but at $100 million, that's kind of like the cap in utility, and $80,000 as it starts to degrade. And so poverty is a real thing, but I think happiness and money are too often linked as causal when they shouldn't be.
Back to Anthony's question about, do you have a choice, right? And I think J.D. Rockefeller's mother, Eliza, was that her name, showed there was a choice. Like she became that mentor at a young age and taught him those important lessons. I think different than what any of us were taught. But, there is a lot of research that this stuff is intergenerational and it can be coded beforehand. And I always think back to, my dad used to say this all the time about anybody that like somebody would talk about old people being tight, and like my grandma in particular, and he would talk about how she lived through the Depression and how rough it was living through the Depression, right? Very similar to the story that I opened up with the Dutch. And my dad used to always say, he's like, man, those people that lived through the Depression, it changed them. It really impacted them and changed them. But then I think about the impact it had on my dad. So my dad didn't live through the Depression, but his parents did. And therefore, that's where that scarcity of money and we're going to run out and there isn't going to be enough. And that's where the throwing around nickels like their manhole covers came from, I think is a direct, my parents, that Great Depression impacted my dad, which in turn impacted me. And it really does go generation to generation.
We have an idiom for that, right? Our society says that, hard times make hard people, make good times, make soft people, make hard times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It really does. We've talked about the fourth turning before. I mean, it really kind of also aligns with that same pattern that just, there's a lot of things that you go 4 generations out and watch the pattern. Let's turn this into abundance. Let's end on a positive note. What do you do to rewrite the script? You were hardwired with this. You didn't choose it, whether it was in your DNA, whether it was your parents or your neighbor or your coach or your community. It doesn't matter. But now you want to do something about it. So let's give the people a solution. Let's go. Who's got a solution?
I think two of the greatest books I've read around this were done by Thomas Stanley, called The Millionaire Mind, The Millionaire Next Door. And they really walked through how millionaires that were primarily self-made think about money. And those books helped me to understand what money concept I wanted to have. And then I could go seek out and ask questions and talk to people to develop that money mindset. And then, it's like when you buy a purple car, you recognize how many other purple cars are on the road the next day. When you start to look for a particular thing that you want to have, you start to find people who have that. And then for me, I wanted to model all the things around that, and I was really careful not to model things that kind of broke other values in my life. So I had to be clear about like what other values I had too, so that it wasn't to the, one thing to the exclusion of something else that was important to me.
Yeah. I would say this, and I think you have to take a step to the side, not a step back. Step to the side and get some help to determine why you're where you are And most importantly, what is it that where do you want to go personally? Where do you want to go with your family if you have one and want one? Where do you want to go in your social life? And seek out the happiness track. And that may or may not lead to money abundance, but it's going to lead to personal and emotional abundance as a start. And if you have that, then you're going to have that. You don't have to worry about that anymore. You can worry about your health. You can worry about your economic outlook, and you can take clear action to move the ball forward. But I think you've got to do a really deep dive on and assess yourself, not necessarily why I'm here, but here's where I am. And I'm a huge proponent of counseling, whether it's psychological, whatever. Find a mentor, talk to somebody, get a sense of really where you are. Because if you don't really understand that, then you really don't. You're standing on sand, or you're trying to climb a mountain where the rocks are loose and you're not going to get anywhere. So that's
Anthony,
what I mean.
I love what you're saying here, but you're talking about one of these layers, right? Like, don't you have to start at the bottom? Like, when it comes to money, don't you kind of have to start with, hey, let's make sure that my food and water's covered, and
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Assess exactly where you are. Look at your bank account. John, I can't tell you how many times I went months without looking at how much money I had in the bank, because I knew it wasn't enough, and it was just going to upset me if I looked at it. So I knew I was paying. My bills were getting paid mostly. Sometimes there were periods when they weren't getting paid, but I shut that stuff out.
Okay.
And that's not healthy, man.
I've been there.
You got to always know where you are. And so Randy asked, how do we create abundance? For me, my suggestion is self-assess. James Clear talks about it. Mark Kelly talks about it. Everybody talks about really assessing who you are, what you are. Stop faking yourself out. Assess your skills. What are you good at? What do you like to do? Put those two things together. Suffer a little bit if you have to while you're pursuing those first two things. Be a dishwasher, be a rag salesman, whatever the case might be. But keep the first two things in mind. What do I like to do, and what am I good at? Doesn't mean you can't develop new skills and get good at being a guitar player and become a rock star at the age of 65 or something. Apparently, there's no age limit on being a rock star anymore. Used to be 27. That's when you died. But apparently now you can be, who the hell is 80? Someone's 85. I can't remember.
Might be Keith Richards is old.
Might be. Yeah.
Anyway. Keith Richards, I think, looks better than I do at this point. And eats better and exercises better. I'm pretty sure he's
one of them that travels and has an entire mobile gym, like a whole semi-trailer gym of equipment that goes with him on tour, and he works out like a maniac, is what I'm pretty sure I've been told. So, all right, Anthony, finish up your thought there.
No, and that's really it. It's self-reflection is a very powerful tool.
So.
And not often used on a regular basis by a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm going to add to what you guys said. So I agree with John's stuff about reading books, but I have read so many books on this. And, you mentioned The Millionaire Next Door, The Richest Man in Babylon comes to mind, and I forget all the books. I have read, probably know more about this topic in a lot of ways than almost anything else, right? And spent a lot of time getting the information. Hell, I wrote a book on money and different things and have gone deep with the podcasts I listen to. So I will also tell you that all of that financial information, I could pass the test. If you listened to me, you wouldn't hear the scarcity mindset so much in those areas. And I could talk about these other things, but nothing changed for me until I worked on the beliefs, the mental, the emotional, the stuff that we started with that was hardwired into me as a kid. Like, that had to change. And to Anthony's point, that couldn't change until I had self-awareness that it was a problem. It took me decades to even figure out it was a problem, right? Once I figured out it was a problem, fixing it, boy, I journaled about it. I went into prayer, meditation, whatever you want to call it. I did things. The two things that I think helped me the most are going to be in, I don't know which order, but I think it was them stacked and everything else and talking about it and support. But it was psychedelics, in particular ayahuasca. There were conversations with God about this. And then Tony Robbins' ability to change, doing his Dickens process that he does in one of his seminars is probably the best thing I've ever seen for changing belief systems. It's unbelievable. And really, that's where I finished it off, in my opinion, in one pretty painful 30-minute process. But those are the things, and those changed. They rewired my brain. And all of a sudden, I got to choose my story about money, not what was already there that I didn't choose. So, final thoughts, gentlemen. John, what are your final thoughts here on this topic?
Not Randy, I think that's the big one for me.
Hold on. You're on mute. We'll cut this out.
I think the big answer is people take away from this that not choosing is a choice. And so if they want to choose, they can. If they don't want to, they can, but at least be deliberate.
Anthony?
I love this line. Emotional wealth and financial wealth are not the same thing. Confusing them itself is a money script.
Love that. We will talk to you after the break. In the meantime, download, subscribe, tell your friends, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Just search for Tales of Abundance. We'll talk to you after the break.
Here at Tales of Abundance, we know that fitness is just as important as money or milestones. It's one of our key 5 F's for lots of us. Taking care of my body while I build my life is one of the more time-consuming and difficult goals to chase. That's why we're partnering with AG1. It's a daily drinkable habit. Less than a minute, that's formulated with 75 plus vitamins and nutrients and designed to support energy, digestion, and immune defense. It even has a few grams of protein that we're all chasing these days. And if you want to try it with our affiliate link, you'll also receive a free AG1 flavor sampler, plus vitamin D3 plus K2 with your welcome kit when you first subscribe, a $72 value. Go to shop.drinkag1.com/tales.
Welcome back from the break, the Abundance Briefing. Gentlemen, there's an AI price war. I mean, the whole world now is talking, we talked about whatever, 5.2 that came out of China, but last week, Kimi 3 came out, and they're saying this thing is on level with Fable from Claude, and I've heard it's 89 times cheaper. I've heard it's 1% of the price, wherever it is. Worst case, it's 50 times cheaper to buy tokens on this thing. This is rocking kind of the world. And by the way, I have already, this weekend, I took my Odin bot and some of the stuff that I was doing with DeepSeek before that was on my machine and open source, I'm directing it toward Kimi for some of the tasks. And even some of the stuff that I was having Claude do is going to Kimi to cut down on my token cost. So I have very quickly done this. I mean, are you guys using it? Are you excited about it? Are scared of it because it's coming from China? What are your thoughts?
I can't use it in my world because I'm in a land of privacy, and we have so many privacy regulations that we can't actually use those models because there's not enough. Like, they're not going to sign up for the privacy things that we need and have. And I would say this, we already know that current token usage is being subsidized by the raises that are happening with AI, which means Kimi's being subsidized even more. And back to your point about, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, like, you got to follow the money to follow the incentives. And so if you're not the customer, then you're the product. And so I think you just got to be really sensitive to where are you the customer and where are you the product. And if you're being subsidized by somebody else, you're the product. And so, which is fine. I think if there's not any, valuable information being given up, there's no intellectual property, no trade secrets. I think there's a lot of things that can be really good. And I think if you can download open source models to be used in kind of a cold, non-internet protected way, that might be good. But I just think that, security is much more sophisticated than the layperson understands. And so I am hopeful that it's driving costs down and will cost down over time. And I can't deploy it today in my use case.
Anthony, I know you have thoughts on this.
Oh, I have thoughts on this. So I want to get this on the record. You put a marker on this. It's my son's birthday, July 27th. It is 12:15 Central Time. This is the beginning of Amazon destroying Toys R Us, Amazon destroying Barnes and Nobles. What we're talking about here is the whole, not the donut. The donut here is what hasn't been created yet. The ability for engineers to create new models. These models today, in 2 years, are going to be passé. Now, I don't know what that means economically to OpenAI and Perplexity and Grok. I'm not going to try to predict that they won't be the Amazon, but you're not going to be paying $50 a token in 2 years. Models are going to be being perfected in a way that they'll be able to serve John's business. Someone will create a model that is highly secure, built for the medical profession, and will do exactly what he needs at an extremely low cost. It's happened over and over and over again. Toyota did it with building automobiles. Amazon did it with building out the internet, and so did a bunch of other companies. But I can't predict that all this money that these guys are spending is going to be a waste, because I do think we need the power generation, and that's where most of it's going. But I think this is the beginning of something real. And I don't think people are looking at the donut. I think they're looking at the whole, and they're looking at the token cost. And the fact that Kimi, whatever it is, and DeepSeek and open source models are getting created every single day, and you're going to be able to put it on your personal computer or your server in your business, I think it's going to change the world and change the lives of these companies.
Yeah, the prices are going to go down, the competition. There's so many things here.
Well, just the beginning of competition. Competition has just started.
Yeah.
Just started, literally.
And the security thing, we talked a couple weeks ago in the same briefing about the CEO, was it Palantir CEO or whatever, talking about how,
Alex,
these models have your data. I'm actually less concerned about a Chinese model, especially the DeepSeek that I have downloaded on the host machine that runs my bots. Yes, it's possible China has a backdoor and is sending data back. But this is open source. Nobody has been able to find this. It's on my machine. Now, Kimi, just so you know, I looked at if it would go on my machine, and it was a joke. It needed something like 1.3 to 1.5 terabytes of RAM to run their model. And my machine had 64 gigs of RAM, so I was a little ways away from that. So I have to use that through OpenRouter. I can't download it directly, but it was interesting over the weekend. A mutual friend of ours was nice enough to take and analyze my AI because my Claude was using so many tokens. And so I sent him what he asked for. He sent me a report back a couple hours later. His analysis was that in the last 2 weeks, so I have a $200 monthly max plan or whatever Claude calls it, right? $200 monthly plan. His thing came back that in the last 2 weeks, I had used $47,000 worth of tokens coding and creating this project I'm working on if I was paying per token, not the $200 plan. $47,000, that's almost $100,000 a month if I was buying it outside the plan. So to John's point about subsidizing, other people that aren't using it as much, or them, or investors, or somebody subsidizing that. There's just, man,
I've said this publicly, Randy. I think the way the future is going to be some version of what Anthony said. I think we're going to have smaller use case models that get put onto people's local devices. Local devices are so much more powerful than they used to be. We just bought a computer for home that was like a maxed out MacBook Pro, so that my wife can use AI in the way that she wants for some personal projects. And it's like, you're going to see these smaller models that are going to be job specific on machines without having to build out entire internal company data centers, probably. And so I think that's going to be, and then you have a lot of local compute, and that's going to drive different utility costs, and it's going to be more decentralized processing. But I think we're going to see more of that happening over time, so that companies can keep control of the cloud-based token use. And I think you're going to see less frontier processing in general. You're going to have to keep the costs in line.
Well, and my next thing is I got to look into this thinking machine. I'm pretty interested in what they're doing with an open model. That's an American company, and I'm I think they used one of the Chinese models to make their model. That's the great thing about the open source is once it's out there, you can do whatever you want and make it yours. So let's move to the next topic.
I do have some advice before we move on, and I use this analogy a lot. So much is changing so fast. I wouldn't want to be on the bleeding edge of anything. I would want to return serve. I'd let these things come out, let a week or two pass, see where the water settles, and then return that serve and make your move. Trying to catch it, catch a falling knife, I don't think is a smart thing. So sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. It'll be interesting. I mean, there's new, big news. Quarterly report came out from Google, quarterly earnings, and they burned a ton of cash. I forget, but I mean, I think it was billions of dollars in cash, and they have just been collecting cash. And they're not the only company that they're investing in data centers and all of this. And it'll be really interesting if these companies, they have a history of getting that money back at an unbelievable rate. I think over time, Google has something like a 33 or 34% annual return on money they invest. And it'll be interesting if that holds true with this deal.
I'd bet on Google. I would bet on Google being one of the survivors of this.
We'll see. Sure. I would bet on the next guy going to the next topic, and that's Elon and Grok and SpaceX. I think this is fascinating. So Elon has announced that they are taking their entire engineering knowledge and all of their files and everything that they know from whatever it's been, 15 or 20 years that SpaceX has existed. They're taking all of that engineering knowledge and training Grok with it. So, man, I mean, everybody's counting them out. They're talking about Anthropic and they're talking about, ChatGPT and these Chinese models. And, it's like Google with all their money as an afterthought, Grok and Elon as an afterthought. But this is big to me. I mean, what are your, I have a lot of takeaways, but what are your guys' takeaways when you think about this with them building that?
I think of Elon, I think about one of the best first principles thinkers of our time. And so if you're saying he's taken everything he's done and it's that type of kind of rigor and thought, I'm super curious to see if the AI follows that and see if it just is a big leap forward, not because of anything technical, but because of just the intellectual rigor that maybe went into it. So I think I'm pretty excited about that.
Anthony?
I don't know how he gets paid for it. I mean, the amount of information that he's going to upload, I guess aerospace companies would want it and so forth, but I don't know how he gets paid for it, but I'm sure he will. This is definitely over my head in the sense of what I use quote unquote AI for, or this technology for. I don't need to know how a rocket was, the thickness of a motor inside of a starship, but this guy he's the future in the present. So I'm just gonna, as the book says, bet on the cowboy. So that's really all I have to say.
Well, how he gets paid for it. One of the things about Elon, I don't think is appreciated enough. Pretty much everything he does, he open sources. He isn't worried about copywriting. And I think his attitude is that I don't give a shit. I'm so going to go build and grow so much faster than everybody else that by the time you figure out how to use what this is, we're going to be on to the next thing. And you're just always going to be 2 steps behind. So that doesn't seem to be his mission. He's got, very clear missions to go to Mars and do these other things. But I'm thinking about the way he's going to get paid, Anthony, is internally. Think about what this does for SpaceX. Think about if he can take that knowledge base of everything that they've learned about rocketry, about material sciences, about physics, and the way these engineers think, how much does that benefit the engineers in all of his companies moving forward, right? Like that seems to me to be an indispensable tool that gives them a significant competitive advantage on top of all the competitive advantages they've built already. And it also seems to me that if I was an engineer and I was designing something, this is now the model. Like Anthropic and Claude seem to have really dominated the coding. Well, dominating the engineering in a world that is going to be about creating new things moving forward, I think, seems like a pretty smart move to me. And it makes me think, I have a friend, I want to be careful here, but he invented something recently, and the guy's an electrical engineer. He's getting it patented. He's trying to figure out how to sell it or raise money. And I mean, he showed me this whole thing. he built this. He couldn't have built it without AI, even though he was, he's a lifelong engineer. He couldn't have built it. He used AI. Well, for what he did, it has to do with drone technology and combining some things. I can only imagine that what Elon's creating with Grok would have made it much easier for him to build what he was building, right? For anybody like that, inventing new things, which, wow, you want to talk about abundance seeking? When inventors and engineers can make new stuff, that's good for humanity.
Isn't it going to also help with problem solving?
Yeah.
Problem solving from last week too, though. If it solves problems the way Elon solves problems, I think that'll be a move forward too.
This may be on the surface an altruistic thing, where he's opening up all this information and data to engineers all over the world, so that they can assist in getting the things accomplished that he wants to accomplish, which is getting us back on the moon, becoming interplanetary. And yes, the folks who invent these new things and new ideas and what have you will get paid, but they're going to need his rockets. They're going to need his technology. They're going to need him to get their payloads into space and so on and so forth. So it could be altruistic, or it could be self-serving in a lot of ways, that he's basically hiring engineers all over the world to solve problems that he doesn't have to write a check to. They can solve the problems for him. They can become suppliers to SpaceX, and we can get there faster. That could be what's behind all this. I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me, because that's the type of thinker he is.
I just think that it creates more abundance, right? More inventions.
Exactly.
And
totally.
And more cool stuff coming out can only benefit us. Well,
yep.
I mean, they can create bad stuff too, but it seems like we're moving in the right direction. So let's go to the next topic. So America's doing a $5 billion AI moonshot, and it's the Genesis mission, and they're rewriting how we fund science. Not everybody's happy about this one, by the way. Who's not happy? The universities. There's been an 80-year partnership between the federal government and traditional universities, and they have plowed tons and tons of money into those universities. Now, a lot of this is going at a more directed toward AI, toward other things that the government wants to work on, and sending more of this money to be used outside of universities and being used, with more targeted, like, hey, we want to expand in these areas. So, John, you're really familiar with the university system. I don't know if you've heard anything. I've heard a little hubbub myself about people being upset because, well, we're changing their financial model and their incentives. But I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that's exactly right. And I don't know a ton about this topic, but I will say this, though. Universities need to get back to basic research. This would help do that in a much more, I think, efficient way. I think applied research, my viewpoint is that we've asked universities to handle applied research, which has been not great for our country. I think we need to let more commercial organizations handle applied research and get universities back to basic research. And that's probably not a very popular opinion. And I think using AI to do some of those things will make it much more interesting. And, back to our conversation about money earlier, I think efficiency in how that money is deployed, AI will give us a chance to be much more rigorous about how we look at how that money is being spent. And so I think those are all good things.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'd bet almost anything that the existing system is extremely inefficient, with misaligned incentives, where researchers, more concerned with retaining the money flow for an existing grant. Finishing a project, finishing a research means I've got to write another paper to get another grant. So I'm sure it's inefficient. The incentives of the universities may be more aligned with creating products or inventions that they can patent and sell and move that money into their endowment, versus, and what this speaks to, and John, you mentioned it earlier, what's the problem we're trying to solve with a $5 billion moonshot? What's the problem we were trying to solve with whatever the billions of dollars that are already in the system? I don't know how this works, and this seems to me to need a czar sitting on top of it, or give the money to private enterprise to figure out what to do with it. But I'm sure inside of here there's a USAID kind of mess going on.
Well,
I think you're saying, Anthony, I think you're saying the same thing, except that I don't think universities should be figuring out how to make money with research. I think that should be the job of the commercial world, and I think we should go.
Totally agree.
Yeah, we should go figure.
Totally agree. That's what they do today, though. They.
Yep.
I mean, we have funded I don't, we'd have to do the research, but things that are in the public domain today that the government funded, that the government didn't earn anything from other than get them started. I mean, it's an old story. Heard it for 20 years. So,
well, I think what's happened is the universities have gotten very comfortable with the gravy train, and it's incremental. Like whatever is the approved science, from what I understand, when you want to do something, if you want to just improve on the improved science by 5 or 10%, you can get funded. If you want to do something that's completely new, questioning the norms, where the real breakthroughs come, right? Where the 100x, 500x, 1000x improvements come, you can't get that approved, is what I understand from outside the system. And I think it's great. Like, let's get individual entrepreneurs testing stuff. That's science. That science is you have to fly in the face of conventional norms and ask questions and challenge them and say, what if we did this? That's where a lot of the breakthroughs were crazy as hell the day before they were breakthroughs, right? And everybody told them they're wrong. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of these stories throughout history. So I think it's pretty exciting if we can redirect the money and redirect the incentives in areas where it has a bigger impact. I think that's a win for everybody. And I hear, well, I have sympathy for the people that might lose jobs or departments or whatever. And I hear, oh, these guys, they're not going to have a job. Well, if you are a top researcher in a given topic, there will be a market for you out there. If you can add value, maybe one of these entrepreneurs hires you, or Google or SpaceX or whatever your discipline is, somebody will hire you if you're actually producing value. And I'm sorry, but I am not that interested in holding on to the jobs of people that aren't producing value. I'd rather, what do you say, John, make them available to market?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful about what producing value means, though, because I think for entrepreneurs and for business people, we often talk about that in terms of like immediate value. And I think there's an intrinsic value in basic research too. So I want to be really careful. Like there is some like moving the field of biology forward drives forward medicine, right? And I have some bias, even though, I grew up in the humanities, I don't know that we need as much research around, the writings of Plato, as we do around like what's happening in physics. Like, I just think that there's some areas that we might find more interesting scientific discovery than others. Although I think if we were to poo-poo philosophy entirely, that would be a mistake as big as the other.
All right, our final topic. Let's talk about Zoe de La Paz. She left a 6-figure engineering job, moved to Yellowstone, and now saves more money. So, it seemed like a financial step backward on paper, but now she's working full-time in the uniform department at Yellowstone National Park and saving more money. So, John, I know this story spoke to you. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's cool where somebody can kind of go, and this is back to the thing we talked about in the first half of the show, which is about being deliberate. Like, she deliberately made some changes, and I think based on the quotes in the article, seems pretty happy about it. And I think this would defy kind of traditional convention where, more revenue is but the reality is that, the top line of money you bring in may not be as important as the money you're putting away or spending or whatever the case may be. And so this is a great example of someone who kind of took a snapshot of where they were. They weren't happy about it. They moved themselves, and now their life, in their words, is better. So,
yeah, I mean, we talked about it. I mean, she stepped back, decided who she was, what she liked to do, and what she was good at. And, and then put the 5 F's across the top and prioritize them. She did a very basic problem-solving methodology in her own way. Good on her. I mean, this is what she wants. Who knows what was going on in her personal life or her professional life, and it doesn't really matter. At 26, she's taking a shot. If it turns out at 36 she wants to go back into engineering, she'll probably have to take a couple of courses if there's still an engineering career at 10 years from now, and she can always go back to doing something else. So I just think it's great. I mean, it's a perfect example of taking charge of your life to make yourself happy. I love it.
The story goes on to say that she calls herself lucky, but that she has a framework for it. And her quote is, "You can manufacture luck in your life." I think that's a great quote. And by the way, she's doing this to build skills. So she's building because she wants to work on Broadway and film costuming. Remember, she said she's working in the uniform department. So she's actually building skills so she can save money, go back to New York and work on Broadway. I think that's pretty cool, but you can manufacture luck in your life, I think is a good way to wrap up this episode. So listeners, go out, spread a little abundance this week. And until next week, thank you for listening and download, subscribe, etc.